Today's lesson is going to be short and sweet, but oh so important. We're walking through chords. We have 4 different kinds of triads. I'm going to show you exactly what they are and how to figure out anytime you have a chord in your music, exactly what that is. Or if you're playing with a chord chart and want to make sure that you're playing the right notes for the chord, this will help you on that front as well. So let's get right into it. Like I said, we're going to be dealing with triads. Triads are chords that have 3 notes. There are other kinds of chords. We can have chords that have 4 notes. We can have extended chords that have even more than 4 notes. Sometimes you'll see chords that have notes doubled. We're not going to be dealing with those today. If you want to know about more kinds of chords, as always, let me know in the comments and I will get to work on making more resources for you. But for today, we're walking really through the basics. And with that said, we have 4 kinds of triads. 2 of them are much more common than the other 2, but I think by learning about all 4, we can also start to understand exactly what's going on a little bit better. So let's get right to it. As I said, we have 4 kinds of triads. We have major, minor, diminished, and augmented. And we're going to walk through exactly what each of these are and how to figure out what you're dealing with if you're playing a chord and we're trying to figure out what on earth am I doing right now. So because most of us are familiar with a C major chord, let's use that as a jumping off point. Also because it's just kind of visually easy to keep track of. So we have C, E, G, and that's our C major chord. If we want to turn a major chord into a minor chord, we actually only change 1 note. We change that middle note and we take it down a half step. So instead of C, E, G, we have C, E flat, G. And actually, to go from minor to diminished, it's also just a matter of changing 1 note. From C, E flat, G, we slide that top note down a half step to C, E flat, G flat. Then let's step back to major, just because it's easier to find. And from here, from C major to go to an augmented chord, we again just change 1 note. So instead of C, E, G, we have C, E, G sharp. This is still not all of the information that you need to know, but I think it's just nice to see an example of each of those and to know exactly how we can move from one to the other, because it helps clear things up a little bit. What is essential to understand is that every single major chord has the same construction, if you will, and every minor chord has the same construction, and the same is also true for diminished and augmented chords. Now, what do I mean by construction? We're starting with everything in root position because that's the easiest to see and that's the easiest to understand. So if we have our C major, a major chord is always the starting note, so the name of the note, and then up 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps. And then from there, that's the first 2 notes. And then from the middle note to the top note, it's another 1, 2, 3 half steps. One more aside before we move forward. This step is so that you understand and get used to this way of finding chords and calculating, because if you're really not sure and you don't want to look at a chord chart, because of course there are also countless chord charts. You can just find them online and print it out and use your cheat sheet and use those to identify your chords. That doesn't really help you understand what's going on. You're not going to understand why it's major instead of minor and vice versa. It's important to walk through this and it's important to understand the principles here. I will say I don't love this approach to learning chords because I think the margin for error is too high. I've used this method with students and just everybody miscounts. We get tripped up over our fingers, we overlook a key, something goes wrong, and inevitably it's not the most fail-proof method for learning chords. I do want you to understand the theory. I'm going to give you a few alternatives of how to approach this and give you some suggestions at the end on how to memorize all of your major and minor and augmented and diminished chords. But it's important to understand what's going on, at least in the beginning, so that if you want to really take everything apart And so that you can put it all back together, you have that possibility. So let's try out finding major chords in a few different positions just so you can see how this method works and if you're able to find the notes correctly. So let's move from C, let's move up to E. And remember, we have our starting note, then up 4 half steps. And once you find the middle note, then it's up another 3 half steps. So we have E, 1, 2, 3, 4, G sharp, and then up another 3, 1, 2, 3, E, G sharp, B. There's your E major chord. It sounds nice and major, and you've found all of the notes. Let's try then a B major chord. So we start on B, remember, up 4 half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, D sharp, and then up another 3, 1, 2, 3, F sharp, B, D sharp, F sharp. Good to go. This formula applies for every single major chord. If you know this formula, you can find every major chord without any major issues. So then let's apply the same theory to minor chords. So we had C minor, C, E flat, G. And you might notice it's actually, since the outside notes are the same, we're actually just going to flip that number of half steps. So instead of 4 on the bottom and 3 between the top notes, we're going to have 3 half steps between the bottom notes. So we play the C and then up 1, 2, 3, E flat, and then up another 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, C, E flat, G. And you can do this in every single position on the piano also. So if we want to go back to E, then we have our E, up 3, 1, 2, 3, G, up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, B, E, G, B. And maybe let's do B flat instead of B minor, just so that we have a little bit of a different example here. So we start on B flat, we go up 3 half steps, 1, 2, 3, D flat, and then up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, F, B flat, D flat, F. That's our B flat minor chord. You can use this half step method, or if you just know the major chords, then you can also know every single minor chord is always just dropping that middle note by a half step, every single one. So if you have C major, we take that E and slide it down to E flat. Maybe let's try D major, D, F sharp, A. When we have a sharp in the middle, it's going to be natural and we're going to be playing just the regular notes. So D, F, A, that's our D minor. Same thing for E major, G sharp turns into G natural, that's E minor. For B major, we have B, D sharp, F sharp. Only that middle note gets changed. At some point, you'll start to recognize these patterns and then you won't have to be doing a lot of micromanaging with the counting of half steps everywhere. And then the inverse is also true because a moment ago, we learned our B flat minor chord, B flat, D flat, F. And if we want to go from minor to major, we raise that middle note by a half step. So we have B flat, D flat turns into D, and the F stays the same. And I would encourage you to play all of these chords, major and minor, back and forth a fair amount, just so that you can really notice the sound and the quality of each of those chords. And because our ear can really tell us much more quickly than counting intervals if we have the right notes or not. Minor, major. From our minor chords, it's very straightforward to find all of the diminished chords. So C minor was C, E flat, G. And remember, to get from a minor chord to a diminished chord, we just slide that top note down a half step. So if you want to use your half step counting method, it's just 3 half steps between every single note. So we have C, 1, 2, 3, E flat, and then another 3. 1, 2, 3, G flat. That's your diminished chord. If we go to E and do the same thing, we have E, 1, 2, 3, G, and then up another 3. 1, 2, 3, B flat. But if we go back to our minor chord, So we have B minor, B, D, F sharp. If you know your minor chords well, finding the diminished is very straightforward because it's just dropping that top note by a half step. And then our augmented chords, which we really don't see very often. Diminished is somehow probably a bit more common than augmented, but it's still nice to know, and also it just kind of rounds out our pattern. So if we have C major, then we take that G up a half step, C, E, G sharp, and once again, we have 2 times the same number of half steps. So we have C up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 to G, and up another 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to G sharp. We still get there, we still find the right chord. E augmented, same thing. We have E up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, G sharp, up another 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. A C on top, actually. You would call it B sharp. That's another topic for another day. But E, G sharp, B sharp. If we use our major to augmented form, then we can start on our B flat major chord, B flat, D, F, and then that F turns into F sharp. You can think of these chords, if we go from augmented down to diminished and back, you can sort of imagine an accordion. We have C, E, G sharp, slide down, slide the middle down, slide the top down, slide the top up, slide the middle up, slide the top up, and we end up somehow with this. So I have 2 more formulas that might be helpful for you in approaching these chords. So the first of these methods is very similar to the half step method. Basically, we're just keeping in mind that triads, if they're in root position, are made out of thirds. We have C to E is a third, E to G is a third. This is one of the reasons that I don't love the half step method, just because I think intervals are somehow a little bit easier to understand, especially since I, as a teacher, talk so much about reading intervallically, and I think that is extremely valuable. There's an issue here that often leads to us getting our wires crossed. Half steps, we do not count inclusively because we have our starting note and then it steps from that, away from that note. 1, 2, 3, 4, for example. Intervals, we do count inclusively. We're counting that C is 1, D is 2, E is 3. And from a reading perspective, intervals are much, much, much more important than understanding half steps. However, there's kind of a catch, and the catch is for several intervals, we have a major and a minor. Major thirds, for example, C to E, have 4 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. Minor thirds have 3 half steps. 1, 2, 3. So if you're pacing with me here, a major chord, since we have 4 half steps between the bottom 2 notes and 3 half steps between the top 2 notes, are a major third on the bottom, a minor third on the top. And then for a minor chord, the inverse is true. We have a minor third on the bottom, a major third on the top. A diminished chord is 2 minor thirds stacked on top of each other. And an augmented chord is 2 major thirds stacked on top of each other. Now, the shortcut that I like to use for finding if a third is major or minor is to think about the scales. And surprise, surprise, we bring it back to scales, because if you've been around here for more than a lesson or 2, you know that I'm always telling you to practice scales. Please practice your scales, please practice your scales. And there are just so many things that we can learn from our scales. And here we have another prime example of things that if we know our scales, because scales are just the foundation of all music. Music is built on scales. If we don't understand scales, it's really hard to understand what's going on in our music. So if you want to figure out what a chord is, sure, you can count half steps and whole steps and whatever. But really much more valuable is to be extremely fluent in your scales so that you know which groups of notes typically fall together. And how I like to approach finding major thirds and minor thirds is I think of my major scale. So my major C major scale, we have C, and then E is the note that falls on as the third note in the major scale. So that's my major third. Easy. You don't even have to think about it. You just know C major, you know it's all white keys, that's your major third. To find the minor third up from C, C minor has E flat. And so then you don't even have to think about which is the minor third and which is the major third. And you don't have to count half steps. You just know your scale and you know which notes play nicely together. That's maybe more of a long game approach to this skill, but hopefully you can also see why it's so valuable to learn all 12 major scales and all 12 minor scales, because it will just help you process all of this information so much more quickly, because you don't think about which notes are in the scale, you just know it. And that comes from practicing them consistently and just cycling through that circle of fifths every single week. Just do a couple from the circle of fifths every week, and after a few weeks you'll start to get the feel for each of these keys, and you'll start to remember a bit more automatically which note each one has. So for example, if I'm actively thinking, okay, is this a major third or a minor third? I'm thinking, okay, C, which C scale has E instead of E flat? It's C major. And then for the top ones, of course, then you have to repeat the process. So E to G, which E scale has a G natural? E minor has G natural. E major has G sharp. So if you're interested in practicing these chords and starting to get more fluent with which one's which and figuring out if it's a minor third or major third, I have developed an entire PDF packet for you. Merry Christmas. And it's a bunch of worksheets that have a bunch of different chords, and it's going to help you practice, is this a major third? Is this a minor third? And walk you through these steps again and again and again, just so that you can find these more automatically. Today, we're only dealing with the chords in root position, because that's the easiest way to identify what we have going on. At some point, you'll want to be fluent enough in this skill that you won't need to go to the root position. So for example, you can play this group of notes and see, aha, that's C major because I have C, E, G, and just cycle through that information quickly. And then when you see this group of notes, you say, aha, that's C minor because I have C, E flat, G, even though it's not in root position. Or you have maybe an arpeggio and you're playing something like these notes. Okay, I have two C's, so one can go away. I have a G and I have an E flat, and that's still C minor. And it takes practicing this skill. You have to keep trying to identify chords or any sort of arpeggio pattern that you essentially just smush back down to a chord and process note by note until you start to see them as a unit. Just like when you're learning to read, you see C, A, T, K, A, T, but now you just see cat. Right? It's the same sort of thing. It takes time, it takes that patience. But if you're willing to put in all of the work, I promise that this PDF packet will be extremely fruitful for you. So download that, get to work, let me know how it goes, and let me know if you want more on this topic. And I'm happy to keep making more tutorials about this. I love music theory. I think music theory is a lot of fun. I also think music theory helps us understand our music on a much deeper level and also memorize more quickly and memorize more effectively and keep things memorized for a longer period of time, because we're no longer reliant on this mechanical memorization. It's not just muscle memory. It's also understanding the ideas, which just means that you're understanding really what's happening in your music instead of memorizing a poem in French. Now you're speaking French and understanding what you're saying as you're reciting that poem. And that's just something that to me is incredibly special. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. For me, it's fun to talk about these things. Let me know all of your theory questions in the comments below, and I will keep making more tutorials for you. So as always, until next time, happy practicing.